Well, if it's not immediately obvious, this video is about Charlie Chaplin. You know, the legendary comic actor, filmmaker, composer, and one of the most important figures of the silent era, but also an icon of modern cinema as well. So, if you don't know who he is, then I don't really know what to tell you, except that you should probably get out from under that rock that you've been living under for the past 100 years or so. But more importantly, I want to talk about how he broke into filmmaking and why he might just be one of the best examples of a true artist misunderstood by his time. And to do that, we need to look at his biography. So, let's start there. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born in London on April 16, 1889, the son of an alcoholic, unfaithful, and frequently absent father, and an emotionally distant mother, who would commit him and his brother Sidney to workhouse and then later a high-security mental institution when she herself was admitted. They were raised by their grandparents until their mother's release, which is something that we'll come back to in a bit. So after their mother came out of the asylum, she would go on tour as an actress and bring her boys along as part of the act. And being without formal education, it wasn't long before young Charlie dropped out of school himself to take the stage. He began performing at age 5 alongside his mother and his brother, doing sketches, songs, and dances, which took them across England, the United States, and even Australia. However, once Charlie reached adolescence, his mother left him and his brother in London under the care of their father, who had recently married another woman while she went on tour. This proved to be an unstable environment, and they eventually ran away from home. For the next few years, Charlie worked as a singer and dancer in various stage productions, including a burlesque version of Romeo and Juliet, which is where he developed his stage persona, the tramp, and which also gave him the opportunity to meet his first wife, who was working as an actress and a singer at the time. In 1910, at age 21, Charlie moved to America and became part of a touring company, performing sketches and farces, often playing the villain. It was around this time that he began developing his first feature-length film scripts as well. But then in 1913, his mother died, and he returned to England for her funeral. It was during this visit that Charlie met another young actress named Edna Purviance, who became a frequent leading lady in his films. Upon his return to America, Charlie's mother would die, and he would go back to England for her funeral. However, during this visit, he would meet another young actress named Edna Purviance, who would become a frequent leading lady in his films. At this point, Charlie was ready to move beyond sketches and vaudeville and actually begin pursuing filmmaking. So he joined the Keystone Company as a performer and director, making his first film in that role, making a living. However, within a year, he left the Keystone Company to join SN There, he directed and starred in a series of successful comedies. In 1915, Charlie moved over to Mutual, where he produced and starred in a series of mostly toreadors with great success. At the same time, he became friends with several prominent people in the film industry, including Mary Pickford, who would become his second wife in 1918. That year, he founded his own production company, First National. And in 1919, he made his first feature-length film, The Kid, which solidified his success as a comedian, filmmaker, and box office draw. And it was the following year, in 1920, that Charlie's son, also named Charles, was born. He had a brief appearance in The Kid and has nothing to do with this video. With United Artists, Charlie released 4 more feature-length films: A Woman of Paris, The Gold Rush, A Dog's Life, A Circus, and City Lights. These films further established his stardom not only in the United States, but internationally as well. And now, looking back at them, they are considered to be some of the greatest achievements of cinema history. However, 1930s brought changes to the film industry. Movies were increasingly becoming soundtracks rather than silent films, and audiences were moving away from Charlie's style of slapstick comedy. His last truly silent film was City Lights, which was released in 1931. But after this, he incorporated sound into his films, which proved to be less successful. One of these films, The Great Dictator, was released in 1940 and became his biggest critical and financial success since City Lights. It was his first film to tackle a social issue directly, in this case, fascism and anti-Semitism. And it was also the first film to cast him as a character other than the tramp. However, despite its success, it also sparked controversy because of its political message. Some critics praised it as a brilliant satire, while others felt that he went too far in his criticism of Hitler and Nazi Germany. Either way, this marked the beginning of the end for Charlie. He tried to capitalize on his success with The Great Dictator by making another satirical comedy, which was about a French businessman who murders his wives to collect their insurance money. But unfortunately, it did not live up to expectations. In fact, it bombed at the box office. And part of the reason why was that it was released right after the US entered World War II. Another contributing factor to the film's failure was that it reinforced anti-French sentiment. However, a larger reason was that many critics saw the film as a commentary on American capitalism. And for this, Charlie was accused of being a communist. Now, while there is evidence that Charlie had previously been sympathetic to communists, he was never officially a member of the Communist Party. But regardless, this accusation put him in hot water. The FBI placed him under surveillance. Studio heads considered him a security risk. And in 1944, he was subpoenaed to testify about his political beliefs. when he refused to answer questions on the grounds of the First Amendment, he was held in contempt of Congress and sent to prison for 6 months. Upon his release, he tried to revive his career with a performance in the 1946 film Limelight, which had been in the works prior to his run-in with the government. But unfortunately, the film failed to have any real success. Worse still, shortly after the release of Limelight, Charlie traveled to Switzerland for the Venice Film Festival, where he was informed that he'd been banned from the United States for having violated immigration laws in the late 1920s. As such, he would never again set foot in the country, and his career in America was effectively over. That said, between 1947 and 1950, he starred in 2 more films, the first being the French-Swiss co-production A Countess from Hong Kong, which was released in 1951, and the last being the Swiss film A King in New York, which was released in 1952. After this, he retired from acting and began composing music and writing his autobiography. In 1959, the ban on his re-entry to the U.S. was lifted, and he was invited to attend an exhibition of his work at the Museum of Modern Art. However, by this point, he had already lived in Europe for 8 years and had no intention of leaving. I end my me onwards. You are art. I were may, you are I, you are I, you are I, you are you are I, you t that you t you do you coffee. I turn me paper my bed back at the way may And while he did return to America in 1962 for a guest appearance on the Jack Benny program, he never revisited the country again. Instead, he spent his final years traveling between Switzerland, France, and Monaco, where he died on Christmas Day in 1977 at the age of 88. Now, if you've been keeping track, you'll notice that there's a gap in Charlie's life between 1923 and 1939, the beginning of his sound films. And the reason for that is that it was during this period that he was making his silent features. And this is important to consider because it shows us how he managed to stay popular throughout a period of massive. The first film in this sequence was A Woman of Paris, which was released in 1923, and, as with everything else that he made, it was both written and directed by Charlie. The film begins with a Parisian flower girl named Anne, who gets pregnant by a man who refuses to marry her. Feeling ostracized, she travels to America, where she meets a man who becomes enamored by her beauty and marries her. However, he soon discovers her flaws, and he goes back to Paris, where he abandons her and their child. She then drifts through a series of odd jobs until she reunites with a first man, who has now become successful and who proposes to her again. But this time, she rejects him and chooses to raise her child alone. All in all, it's a pretty dark film compared to Charlie's usual comedic fare. It was one of his earliest films to include a strong female lead, the first to use subtitles instead of intertitles, and the first to be filmed in a wider aspect ratio. After a Woman of Paris was the circus in 1928, which was produced and distributed by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Now this, interesting, because it was the first film in the series to not be based on one of Charlie's own screenplays. Instead, it was based on a story by both Charlie and his close friend, cinematographer and director Henry Dirks. The film begins with a man who joins a circus to escape his old life, but who is ridiculed for his incompetence. Then he encounters a woman who teaches him how to be a trapeze artist. Together, they perform and fall in love, but he's soon injured and forced to leave the circus. She tries to reunite with him, but he's gone, and she's left with nothing. However, she soon sees a poster advertising the circus, and she returns to it with a new sense of purpose. The entire film was shot in black and white, except for the fantasy sequences, which were tinted. And it was considered to be a departure from Charlie's previous films, which had been almost entirely comedic. It's got a love story, a happy ending, and it tackles complex emotions like grief and self-worth. Then there's City Lights, which was released in 1931 and was Charlie's last completely silent film. He wrote the screenplay, directed the film, and even composed the incidental music. The plot is as follows. A man who falls in love with a blind flower girl, who he believes to be beautiful, spends several years trying to make her fall in love with him. He does this by paying off her debts, buying her apartment, and saving her father's business. Eventually, she regains her sight and realizes who he is, but she loves him anyway. Here Charlie plays two roles, the tramp and the gentleman. Both characters are romantically interested in the same woman, and both are well suited to her. Ultimately, the film is about the power of love. The following year, Charlie made A Woman of Paris, which was released in 1932. It's a romantic drama set in Hollywood about a poor flower girl who is taken advantage of by a producer. Like City Lights, it has a happy ending, but unlike it, it doesn't shy away from the realities of poverty and abuse. This film was also significant in that it marked the debut of Jackie Cooper, who would go on to have a prolific career as a child star. And finally, there's The Great Dictator. It was written, directed, and produced by Charlie, and it stars both him and Paulette Goddard. The plot is as follows. A Jewish barber bears an uncanny resemblance to a brutal dictator. When the dictator is injured, the barber takes his place and finds himself in charge of the country. Once there, he delivers a speech denouncing fascism and promoting peace. But before long, his identity is discovered, and he is imprisoned. Eventually, he is able to escape and reunite with his love. The film was both a critical and commercial success, but it also drew the ire of many pro-war Americans who felt that it downplayed the threat of Nazism. So now that we've looked at his biography and the films that he made in the 1920s and 30s, what can we say about his filmmaking? Well, he was influenced by actors like Joe Derrida, Harry Langdon, and Ben Turpin. He was also inspired by the circus, vaudeville, and the commedia dell'arte. But his method of filmmaking was his own. He famously had his scripts typed up on yellow legal pads, which his assistant would carry around and read to the cast and crew each day before shooting. He rarely used props and instead opted for more practical sets. And he had a small group of trusted collaborators whom he worked with consistently. The cast and crew also often contributed ideas to the script, and improvisation was common. In terms of style, his films are known for their slapstick humor, their whimsical tone, their fantastical settings, and their melancholy endings. As for themes, he tended to write about the lower classes, the downtrodden, the disenfranchised, and the dreamers. As far as composing goes, he was largely self-taught and primarily played piano and ukulele. He preferred to work alone, but sometimes collaborated with Albert Hay Malati and his own son, Carl, who went by the professional name Carl Street. Next, let's take a look at his filmography, starting with his early shorts. There's Making a Living from 1914, The Star Border from 1917, Behind the Screen from 1916, Easy Street from 1917, The Rink from 1916, The Fireman from 1918, 1 a.m. from 1918, A Day's Pleasure from 1919, The Tasters from 1919, The Tasters from 1919, Laugh Clown, Laugh from 1928, Out of the Past from 1928, The Circus from 1917, The Vagabond from 1916, The Adventurer from 1917, The Face on the Barroom Floor from 1916, The Lucky Dog from 1915, My Wild Irish Rose from 1922, A Night Out from 1915, The Rounders from 1914, The Magnetic Man from 1916, The Director's Cut from 1917, The Idol Class from 1921, The Cure from 1918, The Pest from 1916, A Jitney Elopement from 1919, The Bond from 1919, The Bond from 1918, A Little Auto Racer from 1915, Safety Last from 1923, Payday from 1922, The Black Box from 1922, In the Park from 1919, His Royal Highness from 1920, A Smuggler's Daughter from 1923, The Triple from 1919, The Kid from 1921, The Two of Us from 1922, The Klondike from 1920, A Woman of Paris from 1923, The Gold Rush from 1925, The Circus from 1928, City Lights from 1931, A Countess from Hong Kong from 1941, The Great Dictator from 1940, Monsieur Verdoux from 1947, Limelight from 1952, and A King in New York from 1956. As for awards and nominations, he won an honorary Academy Award in 1931 for his contribution to screen comedy. He was nominated for Best Actor for The Great Dictator in 1940, and he won the New York Film Critics' Circle Award for Best Actor for Limelight in 1952. He also has 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his contributions to motion pictures, television, and recording. Finally, as far as legacy goes, he is widely regarded as one of the greatest performers and filmmakers of all time. His influence on comedy is immeasurable, and his films continue to be enjoyed by millions of people worldwide. Additionally, the Tramp has become one of the most iconic characters in cinematic history, and he himself is considered to be a symbol of early cinema. Several films and TV shows have been made about his life, including The Circus, which aired in 1.